actually felt retarded, like really retarded.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I brushed my teeth retarded. I rode bus retarded.
Damn.
In a weird way, I had to sort of just free myself up to believe that it was okay to be stupid or dumb.
To be a moron.
Yeah.
To be moronical.
Exactly. To be a moron.
An imbecile.
Yeah.
Like the dumbest motherfucker that ever lived.
When
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard. You don't...
I am Razio.
Okay guys, this is going to be a long video, so get your popcorn and whatever your poison of choice is for a drink, and let's get started. Now, since the advent of the theme park model of design in the MMORPG space, there have been many choices that have reduced the MMORPG to being about the destination instead of the journey. I've already made a video about this years ago, but it needs to be said again. First and foremost, leveling has pretty much become meaningless in the modern MMO. In fact, I'm surprised it's even still a thing in the games we play today. In the past, with Gen 1 and Gen 2 MMOs, there were a few things about leveling that made it special. In old school MMO design, leveling was made the journey instead of an ultimate destination by first making max level more of a novelty and an achievement in and of itself instead of being where the actual game begins. Secondly, in some games, there were what we call pinnacle levels where reaching said level, for example, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on, that were where you gained a huge boost in power by unlocking certain things about your class, not the content of the game world itself, such as new armor types you could wear, weapon types you could wield, or special talents that made the class you chose more unique and well-defined. In today's theme park MMOs, leveling, I mean, like I said before, is all but meaningless, insanely fast, and has become a means to an end, so you can actually start playing the enjoyable parts of the game that are defined as, you know, air quotes, fun, or end game, another term I absolutely despise. Another way that the destination was replaced, or should I say, replaced the journey itself, is the more recent shift of modern MMOs into a seasonal model instead of being a persistent, living, breathing world. Now, don't get me wrong, seasonal models are fine in different genres of games, such as, you know, FPS games such as Call of Duty and, you know, Fortnite. I guess Fortnite technically is not FPS, but you get what I'm saying. And ARPGs like Diablo, Path of Exile. But IMO, they are detrimental to the MMORPG genre. It further enforces that the journey doesn't matter because nothing is permanent and will easily be replaced, you know, just when the next season rolls around. The seasonal model further exacerbates the problem of replacing the journey with the destination when we go into my next major point here, the gear treadmill. Now, let me be clear. I'm not going to sit here and claim that the gear treadmill wasn't a thing back in the early MMO days. It certainly was. But back then, it was more of a gear journey rather than a treadmill. And let me explain. The previously mentioned seasonal model has made this treadmill, it's pretty much put it on steroids and made it worse. The gear treadmill that is currently found in modern MMOs, such as, you know, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, etc., are fundamentally boring and broken at their core. How so? Well, let's compare and contrast what gear meant and how it was designed back in the early days to what it does and is now. In the early days of the MMORPG, gear was very randomized for starters, and I'm not talking about solely its drop rate. Liken it to the type of gear you see today in games like Path of Exile. There were a lot of different affixes that could be rolled at different values. Set bonuses were not a thing back then, and in my opinion, set bonuses are something that's good that came from modern MMOs. I'll give credit where it's due. But gear overall in games like EverQuest and Assurance Call, and Dark Age of Camelot, etc., fell into 3 categories. Number 1, gear that was static from very specific sources, such as long, sometimes grindy or difficult quest chains or dungeon rewards. Number 2, gear that was partially static and partially randomized via the crafting system in the game, so different crafting qualities would change stats, and certain patterns, for example, could change what stats are on the piece of gear. And number 3, gear that was completely randomized in affixes and drops from higher level mobs that had both the highest likelihood to be a piece of trash and at the same time the highest likelihood of being the best item in the game. This added an element where you were always on the hunt for something better. The min-max of a min-maxer's dream, essentially. Playing the game and hunting for gear was always an avenue for continuously making your character more powerful every single day you played, on top of what you got via, gaining experience and gaining levels and new talent points or whatever. Compare and contrast that with how gear is today in modern MMOs. It's all static. There are few to no randomized stats on any gear that matters. It all drops from the same high-end activity of like raiding, for example, with the occasional best in slot item, which again, best in slot's kind of a stupid thing that's come of a lot of the changes. An item such as that, from crafting. And the only real layer of RNG in your way is if the item drops at all each time you kill a boss for the week. It also mostly becomes completely useless once the current season you are in ends and the new one begins. Every new season also brings in the stupid concept of catch-up gear, and I hate this shit, thus further making the gear you got with effort earlier in the season even more meaningless. If you've watched my content for any reasonable amount of time, you'll know how much I hate the entire concept of catch-up gear, and I just think it needs to go away. Everybody should start from the same square. You all paid the price of entry for the game, and you should just start where everybody else did. But anyway, I digress. To also add another layer of uselessness to the gear is, back in the day, gear used to be somewhat of a status symbol of the amount of time and effort you put into your character and what you were able to actually achieve in the game. Now it's all meaningless because it's handed out like candy. In fact, some of the best looking gear in these games comes to you with the swipe of a credit card via an RMT microtransaction in the game's in-game store. Now, all of these points about gear, the destination replacing the journey, and the seasonal model in modern MMOs ties in beautifully to my next major point on what the modern theme park MMO model has destroyed about the genre, and that is time gating. Imagine, if you will, if you paid a high price or a monthly annual fee for a lifetime ticket to an actual theme park. Once you entered the amusement park, you come to learn that you can only ride the best rides in the park once per week. This concept is only the first part of what makes the modern theme park MMO such a bag of spoiled ass. Time gating is a common trope that has permeated nearly every aspect of the genre. Its entire design is about making as little content as possible last as long as possible. It's a huge perk for the game designers and caters perfectly, to the seasonal model which has infected the genre. It benefits the shareholders and the designers, not you, the player. It's the ultimate most profit for the least amount of effort model. There seems to be no limit to the things the devs will not time gate in modern AAA gaming. The best loot is behind lockouts, and those are time gated, resulting in a character power and progression behind a time gate. Areas you can access and explore are behind, you guessed it, a time gate. All designed to hamstring the player as much as humanly possible, so you play the game out of FOMO and obligation instead of fun and immersion. Fuck, even the game's narrative itself in some games is stuck behind a time gate, and that leads me to my next major point. MMOs being too focused on an overarching narrative. Now, once again, let me be clear. I love a good story. I am a slut for a great story. Stories are one of the main driving factors and why I love RPGs so much over other genres of games. But I also need to be clear in saying that the style and way you tell a story are just as important as the story itself. In the OG days of the MMORPG, the story was told in a very different way than it is today. Much like in a good D&D campaign, you and those in your party are a simple group of adventurers in a world and universe much bigger than yourselves. There are countless parties all on their own journeys in the world you inhabited, and to be real, you're just trying to survive with your own individual backstories, motivations, and purposes coming together to accomplish a single goal. In single-player RPGs, the stories tend to be more hero-focused. You rise up from the ashes as a chosen one or one of destiny to slay gods and stop the world's ultimate destruction. In single-player RPGs, the story is usually more character-focused and driven, and not so much focus and emphasis is put on the world the characters themselves inhabit. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, but this is generally how things go. There is a set script to follow, and you're on rails, much in the same way things are when you read a good fiction novel. When you read the book or play a single-player game, you can't change much, if anything at all, about the story. You're just along for the ride, and that's perfectly okay. You go on a journey that the writer has wanted you to go on, and that's just fine. But MMOs in the beginning were something quite different. Again, harken back to my D&D example. You yourself are not forced to be what the designer or GM, whatever DM, told you to be. The lore of the world itself was all discoverable in the game through item drops, boss fights, and small snippets of story told by the NPCs of the world you inhabit. How you react to such things, just like in real life, shaped your allegiances, your perspectives, and overall what you chose to do in the game. The world itself was the antagonist and the protagonist, and it was your interactions with the world, and most of all with other players in the game around you, that shaped whether you're a hero or a villain or kind of neutral. The players themselves shaped and formed what the world of the game was like for everyone, as opposed to being forced into a role that the designers decided is the way you should play the game, who your character should be. Modern MMOs, such as World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, have taken the single-player formula for an RPG story and forced it down every orifice like we're some cheap Thai hookers.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Today, players are stuck on rails and forced to play the role of the god-slaying champion or warrior of light the developers want you to be. The focus on keeping you on the rails of the ride at all times, narratively speaking, have developed the MMORPG into less of a living, breathing world and instead into more of a single-player game with multiplayer co-op functionality features. And the saddest part is that a great story like you find in the majority of the game in a game like Final Fantasy XIV could have been told so much better if it was in a single-player game to begin with. Now, I won't go into the narrative of WoW, since it's no secret that Blizzard can't tell a story for shit anyway. Personally, I don't believe that the type of storytelling and narrative focus that we find in most modern MMOs belongs in the genre at all. The world and players themselves should tell the story, and the adventures you have with your peers in the game should be what you remember when you reflect on your good times in the game, not this god-slaying champion of whatever bullshit. Speaking of the world itself being the main protagonist and antagonist, it ties perfectly into my next major point here. All the risk and danger, the whole risk-reward aspects of the game's world have been lost in modern MMOs. Take a look at modern games like Elder Scrolls Online, WoW, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2, etc. The world poses no real threat to you, and there is no real danger. You can endlessly pull huge waves of mobs and destroy all of them, no problem. And guess what? If you die, it literally doesn't fucking matter. Nothing of value is really lost. You don't really give a shit if you die because it doesn't really mean anything. Contrast that with Gen 1 and 2 MMORPG design. Certain enemies and zones were a death sentence if you went in unprepared or underleveled. And when you died, not if, death was a certainty back then, the cost of your failure was steep. You would lose items, money, and in some cases even experience. Death was a serious punishment and hindrance to your progression, and I think this was absolutely necessary. Why? Because it placed death and failure as something that you absolutely wanted to get good enough to avoid. It raised the stakes, forcing you to, quote-unquote, get good, as the kids say, and made you make smarter decisions on where you went, what you fought, and whether the risks were worth the potential rewards in whatever activity you chose to do. In addition, the even greater risk that was associated with PvP has all but been removed in modern MMOs. PvP has been reduced to a side activity, heavily instanced with no real consequences when you lose, no real risks are taken in killing another player in an open world environment, and the entire idea of open world PvP as a whole has been a lost concept. Now, I understand that this is to the great delight of many a Care Bear, but if the risk-reward ratio is just right, as it was in many past MMOs, which heavily punished ganking, it can cause even the biggest of cowards to decide to engage in it and, man up and get good. But I digress. If you died, regardless of if it was in PvE or PvP, you often had the even more risky task of going back to go get what you lost. In fact, the best way to go about doing such a thing required you to do something that is my next major point, which the modern MMO has not only discouraged, but in my opinion has absolutely destroyed, which is interaction with others in a social space in the game for help. Look, I get it. Social anxiety is a thing, but let's also be honest. We live in a day and age and society where kids are catching and collecting mental illnesses and excuses like they're fucking Pokemon. And I understand that us geeks as a group tend to be more introverted and human interaction isn't necessarily on the top of our priority list, to put it mildly. But in MMO gaming, one thing we already have that should knock this anxiety down a notch or two is you are in a game where you know that everyone else in the world shares your love for that game. MMO, in the acronym MMORPG, is what sets this genre apart from nearly every other one. And look, I get it. The novelty of being in a game where most characters around you are other players and not NPCs is long gone. We are real deep into the age of the internet. I mean, shit, most games these days are permanently online in some form or fashion, even the single-player ones. But I cannot tell you how often I see the statement, social interaction should not be forced in an MMORPG. Okay, if you're of this opinion, you're entitled to it. But let me use an analogy so I can carefully explain how much of a fucking idiot you are. Imagine playing a game like Breath of the Wild, and once you see that you're being forced to play the entire game on your own, you end up doing this.
Are you fucking retarded? The hell's the matter with you?
You're playing the wrong genre. Stop trying to make MMOs something they're not. We already have single-player games. Play those. You're part of the problem. Anyway, I digress. The social multiplayer aspect of this genre is the beating heart of these games. Don't believe me? Go and play an MMO that's on its last legs and has little to no community, and come back and tell me how quickly you get bored. Just as in D&D, you need other people on your adventure with you to make it meaningful. You need friends, guildmates, adversaries, and rivals to make the experience complete. Modern MMO theme park / seasonal design has completely abolished this most important and all-encompassing factor in a few ways. Number one, LFG, LFRQ systems. These systems have sacrificed exploration, interaction, and adventure at the altar of convenience and accessibility. You can just stand in a city and queue up with other faceless players that have no real desire to interact with you. Think of how common it is to join a dungeon in modern MMOs or a raid and where nothing is said the whole time outside of a random troll comment. Number two, the perks of guilds have been removed. Since everything is queuable and puggable, there really isn't a point to being in a guild outside of those doing the absolute bleeding edge of endgame progression, which only a minor percentage of players actually do. Number three, and this one's important, the active destruction of character server reputation via paid server transfers, name changes, and guild name changes and transfers. In addition, with server technology heavily layered and instance-based, it's unlikely you'll ever run into the same player twice. In the past MMOs, your reputation and that of your guild was of the utmost importance. It determined who you were at war with, which players interacted with you, and how they did so. It determined how other players felt every time they saw your name pop up on the screen. Number four, systems put in place that actively make other players in the game a hindrance rather than a boon. For example, in raiding, you're only going to ever be successful as the most retarded person in your group, as other players' failures almost certainly mean you will fail too. And I can expand more on this, but I think you guys understand what I'm talking about here. Systems such as in Final Fantasy XIV, and this is number 5 by the way, that actively make you unable to actively play with your friends if they've not reached the same point in the story as you yet, because your world instances are different to theirs. It's just another negative for the single player hero stories in an MMORPG idea that we talked about earlier. Now, if you're a veteran MMO player like myself, I'm sure if you look back on all the most memorable times you've had in MMOs in the past, it has very little to do with items you got, actual boss mechanics you avoided, and kills you got in raids and in PvP matches you've won. And it's far more likely to have to do with the people you did all of those things with. With all those aforementioned points now listed, it paints the picture of the general anonymity of the internet that has infected the MMORPG genre to great detriment, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is, the more anonymous and less accountable every player is held within their own game worlds, the shittier the game gets overall. Okay, we've delved a lot into the heavy hitters in this video, and now we will move on to a point that is a little more subtle, largely unnoticed, but equally as important: the homogenization of the Trinity. Now, I understand that the Trinity isn't necessary for an MMO to be successful. Games like Assurance Call, Guild Wars 2, etc. have all proven this. And if your game isn't designed with the Trinity at its core, it doesn't mean it's going to be a bad MMO. If it works, it works. But the Trinity model is by far and away the most relied on and used model in the genre. And man, let me tell you, the Trinity in modern MMOs has been more abused than Lily Phillips' nether regions at this point.
That's really fucked up.
How so, Raziel, you handsome 14% body fat devil, I hear you say? Well, it's because it has been homogenized beyond recognition at this point. All classes these days seem to need to have near equal levels of self-sustain, utility, DPS, defense, and get-out-of-jail-free cards, all in the service of where most of the modern genre's activities take place: in single-player content. The support role, such as bards, have largely been removed from most MMOs, and some games are so extreme in this homogenization that each class is essentially the exact same outside of the animations that you see when you hit buttons. I'm looking at you, Final Fantasy XIV. Yeah, I said it. Come at me. Come at me, bro. Come at me, Church of Yoshi P. I'm here. I'm ready. Enjoy your game where everyone is considered a DPS with just different colored icons. A lot of homogenization can be boiled down to several factors. 1. Most content is single-player focused these days. See my earlier points we already discussed. Number 2. Players are pussies and complain when they can't do everything every class can do, and they have to pick a more permanent role that best suits their goals and playstyle instead of one that can just do it all, resulting in the devs just eventually giving in to the whining and try to appease them. Number 3. Encounter design has heavily shifted towards DPS checks, timers, and do the dance perfectly scenario type bullshit that forces players into trying to min-max with boring and static gear and talent systems no less, or in some cases no talent system at all. 14. Number 4. PvP shifting away from a more rock, paper, scissors model and attempting to make everything perfectly balanced and fair, which is an impossible feat to achieve. All of these factors and many more I probably forgot to mention have absolutely contradicted the entire reason the Trinity was put into the genre in the first place. Look, either go full Trinity or don't do it at all.
Go fingerless or go fingered. Those are the choices. None of this Cats is coming back to Broadway bullshit.
Anyway, with all the points I presented in this video, and I'm sure I missed some, comments down below if you can think of one that I missed. One that comes to mind immediately, which I'm sure would be brought up and could honestly be a topic in and of itself, is the emergence of add-ons that practically play the game for you, and of course data mining, which spoils a lot of exploration and discovery, which is a much harder problem to solve, though it is possible. It's time to bring this baby home with my overarching point. And that's something I've said many times in a ton of videos and live many times on many of my streams, and that point is this. When you try to make something for everyone, you end up making something for no one. MMOs, from their conception, were designed for a very niche D&D rooted audience. When you try to change that and make it appeal to every gamer in existence, you will inevitably end up with the mess that is the modern theme park seasonal MMO. Most of the problems I've listed in this video are problems that the theme park seasonal model has created. They didn't exist in the Gen 1 and Gen 2 era. In addition, when you design a game in this way, what the big company suits and shareholders want and what will make the most profit becomes the ultimate driving factor in what decisions get implemented into the game. The MMOs of the past, such as DAOC, EQ, AC, Shadowbane, Ultima Online, and yes, even Vanilla WoW, were games created by gamers for gamers, and they weren't the heavily incorporated slop that we see today. Trying to appeal to everyone and attempting to meld the single-player RPG with the MMORPG is ultimately an exercise in futility and is a zero-sum game that results in the absolute burnout that is so commonly found in the MMORPG enthusiasts, such as myself. So what's the answer? Well, quite literally going to the genre's roots again and many of the OG ways of thinking. The idea that you need to have the same amount of subscribers as World of Warcraft had in its peak during Wrath of the Lich King in order to be considered a success needs to die. Do any of these games exist or are in development now? Well, I'm happy to say yes, there is. If you didn't watch my last video review of my experience in the Alpha 2 of Ashes of Creation, and you're an MMORPG old school purist like myself, then I suggest you give it a watch because I talk about many of these same points in that video. If Steven and his team at Intrepid can accomplish even half of what they are promising when this game goes live, then this game will be the game that solves a lot of these problems. Now, keep in mind, I'm also skeptical of if they can actually pull it off. And I am no way, shape, or form being paid to promote the game in any way. I'm just speaking my mind and being honest and informing you, dear viewer, of the small glimmer of hope that does still exist. At the end of the day, like many of you, I'm of the opinion that the genre has gone way too far away from its roots and its niche audience that the genre was always meant to cling to and what it was always meant to be. And I just want to play a game again that fits the definition of the original idea of a living, breathing world that I can truly sink a long time of my ever-aging life into. As we all know, I'm pretty much a geezer at this point.
Old as fuck.
That was a long one. Anyway, guys, that pretty much wraps up my video. Comments down below. I really want to know how you felt about what I said. If you agree, disagree, why or why not, all down in the comments down below. I do my best to read every single comment ever left, even the ones that are from people that clearly are bottom of the wheel IQ. But hey, everyone has their opinion, and YouTube comment section is the place to voice it. Some short announcements real quick. I am starting to stream again, and I'm going to be streaming on YouTube and Twitch simultaneously while I stream to give, you know, people that like both that are on either platform to give a watch and tune in. A set streaming schedule is not up yet, but it will be by the beginning of the new year. Also, everybody, my goal for 2025 is to try to get my sub count up to 10K. Let's see if we can hit it. We're almost at 6 now. So that's a lofty goal, but you guys can help. If you like the video, like and share it. I really, really appreciate it. And if you don't like it, thumbs down and, you know, go fuck yourself. I don't care. But anyway, guys, those are my thoughts and feelings. Yours down below. And as always, my friends, keep it real.